Awesome. Live. Give a minute for some people to get in. Make sure that everything's working. It's been a while. This is going to be a little bit more on brand, I'll say. There we go. And it's on. All right. So, given that I have a day job, the pace of events have just, they've been accelerating for a long time. It's one of those things, just technologically, in terms of our interconnectedness, in terms of the numbers of agents out there, things have just been going so fast that it's like in the time it takes to think about what just happened, some other thing has happened, and some other thing has happened, and some other thing has happened. And it's like you want to make a video, and then it's like, that does that even matter anymore? Stuff is just going so crazy. Maybe this is a function of being older and like everything just seems to be faster now. I don't know. Some combination, all of the above. But the stuff that's been happening very recently has just been, it feels like a sea change. It feels like something major has happened. It wouldn't surprise anyone here to know that I obviously would have been and was against the war with Iran. I was against it when they did the 6-day bombing or the 12-day war last summer. But what really kind of struck me kind of in a surprising way was a couple weeks ago when they released footage. Living in the days when years happen. Yeah, it's absolutely right. And this is actually kind of bring it home. They released footage of a Navy submarine sinking an Iranian ship. And when I saw the video, I didn't know any of the details. We still don't know all the details about it. There's a couple things about that incident that are really disgusting. But my initial thought was I knew that the last time a U.S. Navy ship had sunk another ship in war was in 1945 in World War II. I'm going to assume in August, maybe even in September. Now, there have been other countries that have had submarine warfare. Very limited compared to the first two world wars, but in the Falklands War, the British sank the General Belgrano, an Argentinian battleship that actually was a decommissioned U.S. Navy ship that they had sold to Argentina. And then I think in 2010 or 2011, a North Korean submarine sank a South Korean submarine or ship. But other than that, I think this is the first time it's happened since World War II. It's definitely the first time it's happened with an American ship. And I just read this winter, maybe a month or 2 months ago, a very good history of Pearl Harbor called At Dawn They Slept, or Dawn We Slept. And you go through that book, and it's a very even-handed book. I won't say that I agree with everything in it. I was going to make a review at one point. Maybe I still will. But the legacy of World War II, it's not a legacy, like the mainstream legacy is not one that I agree with, right? There's World War II is not a case of the angelic good guys versus the demonic bad guys. There were evil, horrible people in World War II. And in the collection of states and societies, the Americans are certainly maybe the best or one of the best, at least of the major combatants. But among the Allies, the Soviets are the worst of anyone. Worse than the Nazis, worse than the Japanese. The British are not great. British have an enormous amount of blood on their hands. They did. Their role in the war is hardly one of innocent bystander, and with the United States. But for lack of a better term, the myth, the narrative in our civic religion is that we were attacked unprovoked, that we hadn't done anything wrong, that the Japanese were just aggressive and violent and warmongers who just loved war, and they wanted to launch a war of conquest, which was true. They did. But there's a big emphasis in the historiography that the Japanese and the Americans were trying to negotiate. Now, World War II in Europe is easy to date, September 1st, 1939. The war in Asia is more complicated because there was an ongoing war in China. The Japanese had invaded Manchuria in 1931, and then they'd invaded most of coastal China in 1937. And this is kind of like the forgotten war because the number of Chinese who died in that war, which starts in 37 and ends in 45, is something like 13 million. So half the Soviet Union, but 3 or 4 times the next largest number of casualties, which would have been either Germany or Japan. They both had something like 3 or 4 million apiece. And the Americans wanted the Japanese to leave China. In 1941, the Japanese also occupied, without a military invasion, the former French colonies of Indochina, what is today Vietnam. And so the Americans were trying to negotiate with them to leave there. And weren't really offering them a ton, but they were embargoing their oil, embargoing their scrap iron and their steel. And they were heavily dependent at the time. Most of their oil was coming from the U.S. And these negotiations didn't go anywhere. I think both sides, and I think especially the Americans, wanted them to go someplace. Like, it was good faith in the sense that they hoped that there would be some kind of accommodation reached and that a war could be avoided. I mean, it's kind of famously, I mean, there were delusional Japanese people who thought it would, the Americans wouldn't have the will to fight. But they had very, very knowledgeable people who knew America very well, and knew that this would be an absolutely desperate struggle that Japan would almost certainly never win. And if there was any chance of peace, they should go for it. And those negotiations failed, and then the date that will live in infamy, the December 7th, a dastardly, unprovoked attack. Pearl Harbor. Everybody, one of the most important days in the history of the world, and in the American psyche. There's been no day like it since. Not even now with 20 years of hindsight, 9/11. 9/11 is the closest analogy. And speaking for myself, as someone who lived through 9/11 but not Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor still seems to burn brighter even now, even though, there's very few people left alive today who were alive at all, or at least old enough to remember it. My grandma's still around. My grandma's 105. She does remember Pearl Harbor, but she obviously wasn't there. She heard about it on the radio and the news the next day. But this image that we're the good guys, that we were attacked unprovoked as these evil Japanese pretended to negotiate. And then to see the President of the United States and our military and our State Department and our government, and let's face it, a big swath of our country, of the people who live here, the people who make their voices heard as much as they can, cheerlead for it. Twice in negotiations attacking Iran, during negotiations where we have every evidence that they were negotiating in good faith. And unlike Japan, who attacked a much more powerful country that they were sure to lose. We attacked a much weaker country that we could surely defeat. I mean, like in terms of an existential battle of arms. And the other thing is, it's so obvious. It's been admitted and then walked back and admitted, but the only thing that makes sense is that this is a war for Israel. And one of the things that's changed so much in the last couple years is the clarity of Israel's role in this country's foreign policy and indeed within our society generally. And I wasn't the strongest Israel critic in the world. I certainly made videos about it. I had a video banned on Holocaust denial 10 years ago, which was a very tame video, to be honest. I just said that it shouldn't be a crime to question the Holocaust without actually questioning the Holocaust. Just that it shouldn't be a crime. And attitudes have shifted so far, so fast that it's almost unrecognizable. I will be watching a clip of, say, someone like Ana Kasparian or Jon Favreau. Jon Favreau, the disgusting Obama apologist speechwriter. You know, the crystallized mendacity of a progressive hypocrite, right? Who still worships at the altar of Barack Obama. He was talking about AIPAC, and he sounded exactly like Nick Fuentes. And finding myself watching the Young Turks and going, I agree with what they're saying on this issue. On many others, certainly not. And it's totally shocking to me. And we know that they have their thumb on the scale, that they're pushing the algorithms, that they're doing everything that they can to censor and to curb and to influence. And despite all of that, it's like the protocols of the Elders of Zion has become like a cultural touchstone. Like it's become like, I had seen a video a few months ago, and it was these three teenage guys sitting around a dinner table, and they were talking about how Nick Fuentes is controlled opposition run by Zog. And I couldn't tell if it was a skit or genuine. I couldn't believe that there would be three teenagers who would even know what Zog was, even have heard the term, would even know what Israel was. I mean, when I was in high school, the number of people in my school who could have told you that Israel was even a country would have been less than 1% of the students, let alone found it on a map or known any of the history. And then 2 weeks ago, I was at the gym. I was in the sauna, and 6 high school guys came in, and they were already talking. I didn't say anything. I just sat back, and they were talking about how Benjamin Netanyahu runs America, how Trump and the entire government has been blackmailed by child sex raping at Epstein Island, how it's a war for, like, I could not, it was real. This is a random, they went to a local high school that wasn't like Libertarian High School or Free State or Academy. It was a totally mainstream, run-of-the-mill, middle class, unradical New Hampshire slice of demographics. And it's just stunning to me. And I'm here for it to an extent. I want... It's been a very, very long time in coming. I never thought, and I see this a lot, where people are rooting for Iran. No, people don't want people to die. I don't want people to die. I don't want American soldiers to die. I know people who are in the Air Force right now. I don't know where they are. I hope they're safe. I hope they don't get killed. I don't even want Israelis to die. Right? As much as I disagree with Zionism and their their society in so many ways. I don't want them to die, but they've literally been asking for it, and it's deeply cathartic uh, at times. Maybe that's a failing on my part. Um, and now to see the American empire, we have spent. I mean, if you think our military entrenchment in the Gulf does not go back to the 2003 Gulf War. It goes back to before the 2001 Gulf War. Saudi Arabia has kind of always been, in many ways, a client of the United States. It was the U.S. government that gave them oil expertise and set up their oil industry, and where their princes have always come to get educated. They kind of came on the scene as the British Empire was kind of setting, and we kind of took on that role. And even before the first Gulf War, we had lots of bases in Saudi Arabia, and we were covertly expanding their size. They would do something what they called overstock, where they would say they were rotating troops in, but they would just keep bringing more and more. And then we had this episode. I mean, first of all, there's an Iranian revolution that we're now being told was a perpetual war since 1979. That has never ended. But in 1984, 1985, despite us being at war with Iran, apparently, Ronald Reagan, through Israel, sold them missiles so he could fund his war in Nicaragua. But people don't. I don't know if people have heard of Iran-Contra. They didn't sell missiles directly to Iran. They sold them through Israel. At the time, Israel had a good relationship, not an alliance, but a good relationship with Iran, because at that time, they saw their main enemies as being like Iraq. This is something that they switched under Itzhak Rabin in the 90s, 93, 94, for totally arbitrary strategical thinking reasons. And we support this Saddam war in Iran for almost 10 years, 8 or 9 years, where 500,000 Iranians are killed. I don't know if it's a similar number of Iraqis, probably not, but many, many hundreds of thousands. And I remember, I was young. I do remember the first Gulf War. I was in first grade, and I thought it was awesome. I thought it was so cool. We would see every night on the news, on CNN or ABC, they would show the green and black night vision video of Iraqi buildings getting blown up and tanks, and it didn't really convey correctly that 90% of the munitions were dumb munitions, and even the ones with lasers. I mean, who knows what targets they were picking, and I thought it was so cool as a kid. It's fun. It's funny if I look on Twitter or I watch the news, how some people never grew up and they still have that jingoistic, nationalistic, vicarious machismo. Like if a U.S. Bomb blows up an Iraqi tank, that means you're tough. I mean, I get it, but yeah, and I see Cinefans saying it's the war that made war popular again. George Bush, Herbert Walker Bush said, "We whipped Vietnam syndrome. After Vietnam, Americans were tired of war. They didn't trust our government. And if you were in government and you wanted to be pro-war, that was a problem." And the Gulf War was just a wonderful palette. It was popular. They won it very quickly, so-called. I mean, the war didn't actually end. And the full price, we still don't know the full price. I think the number of casualties in the war was like killed and wounded in battle was less than 400. But then the war didn't end. And this never made sense to people at the time. It didn't make sense to me as a kid because we were told over and over again the Iraqi army was totally annihilated. The biggest tank battles in history that were so one-sided. That war is still today considered by most definitions the most one-sided war ever. And you have to think, when you look back at it, we had built a military to take on the Soviet Union, which was the most militarized state in the world, a state that was 40%, even in peacetime, devoted to military, that was preparing for another world war, that was preparing to fight Germany/NATO. And it never got to, but it created, they created so many munitions that even when you parsed out all the other republics and every other conflict Russia has had and all the depredations of a totally corrupt society, that they still have enough equipment left over 30 years on to fight the biggest war in Europe since World War II. But the U.S. military was built to fight that and never got the chance. And so now they have this second-rate Iraqi mock-up because a lot of their equipment was from the Soviet Union. And it was completely one-sided, and it was, the jingoism was palpable. And I totally, I mean, I was a kid, so I'm not going to blame myself, but I thought it was awesome. But we didn't know that the depleted uranium that we used to litter the highway, to give the highway of death its name, to kill 60,000 Iraqis as they fled, that many of our soldiers would breathe that in and die as a result, and suffer horribly as a result. And also we were told that Saddam Hussein is the devil. He's the worse than Hitler. He's horrible, the butcher, and all true. A man who earned his reputation, to say nothing else about him. And yet, after his armies were defeated, and George Bush went onto television and on the radio and told the people of Iraq that now was your chance to rise and overthrow your horrible dictator, as indeed he truly was. And they did. The Kurds did. The Shiites did. And we stopped. And we said, actually, never mind. Oh, and Saudi Arabia, you know how we have 500,000 troops here to get rid of Saddam? Well, he's still around, so guess what? No reason for us to leave. This had actually been asked when Saddam had invaded Kuwait. And here's the problem with the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE. They have all this wealth and all this oil, but their societies are mostly dysfunctional in the sense that they don't have an army. They can't have armies. They don't have people who are able or willing, or the combination of the two, to actually stand up to an armored division. And when Iraq invaded Kuwait, the Saudis said, what are we going to do? They were worried they might be next. That probably wasn't really a danger, but it's understandable that maybe they felt that way. And famously, Osama bin Laden offered to kick Saddam out of Kuwait. And I think the Saudis correctly said, Kuwait's not Afghanistan. There's no mountains. There's no caves. There's no hideouts. You might be able to do some terrorism, but you're not going to kick out the Iraqi army. And then Dick Cheney, then Secretary of Defense, he shows up and he says, we can do it. Give us more. We already had bases there, but allow us to bring in 600,000 troops, everything that we need, and we'll take care of it. And the Saudis' question was, well, what are you going to do when it's over? How are we going to get you to leave? He said, well, once Saddam is gone, there'll be no reason for us to have to stay. Well, made sense, but then they didn't get rid of Saddam, and then they stayed. And so part of the cost wasn't just the people who died, or the fact that we were cured of a syndrome where we were skeptical of war, or all the Iraq war syndrome that still plagues people, or the fucked up veterans. People don't always remember, but one of the veterans of the Iraq War, the first one, the Gulf War, was Timothy McVeigh, who was overpaid apparently, and then forced to give the money back, and he was pissed. And that was one of the reasons that he blew up the Murrah Federal Building in 1995 and killed 268 Americans. One of the reasons. I mean, the other reasons was he was working for the ATF at the time, but that's a whole other topic. But the other cost was that we now had military bases in Saudi Arabia that were very public, and Osama bin Laden didn't like that. And so part of the cost was... Ivan, great to see you. I see that you messaged. So part of the cost was 9/11. And then when the second Gulf War happened, we spent trillions of dollars building bases in Qatar and Bahrain, in UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Iraq. And those Saudi princes have spent billions and tens of billions paying us to be their defense. And patronizing us, coming here, sending their kids here to go to school, investing in our economy with all of their, I don't want to say they're ill-gotten gains. I mean, they're Hashemite kings, so it is kind of ill-gotten. It's dumb luck that they have this amazing oil resource that they didn't earn. But I watched the movie. What movie are we talking about? And we have Qatar giving Trump a $500 million private jet in addition to all of their contracts and all their other bribes. And they're paying us to defend them. They're paying us all this money for all of this defense. And the second Israel says we're going to attack Qatar to kill Hamas, we let them do it. We facilitate them getting attacked. And the second we start this war with Iran, that we here in America are not going to pay the consequences. I mean, we are as far away and as safe from this as anyone in the world. Like, we're unlike all the East Asian countries and all the European countries. We actually have energy security here. We're underproducing what we could. We have enough between our natural gas and our oil and our coal that we're fine for 1,000 years. Unlike all these other countries. When the Gulf War happened, we were dependent to a large extent on Gulf oil. That has changed in the interim. I was just coincidentally a big part of that. I spent 10 years drilling horizontal wells in the Marcellus Shale and other formations in the U.S. We have so much that we're just not even going for most of our stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's reserves of hydrocarbons in Alaska that we don't even touch because they're, and I'm talking all of them: natural gas, coal, yeah. Well, anyway, they spend billions of dollars for us to protect them, and then we just completely abandon them for Israel. We do everything for Israel. It's humiliating. It's been interesting to see people like Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur become nationalists because it's so humiliating. And I don't know the truth. I try and look at things probabilistically, and you just wonder, what are the odds here? And I thought, I mean, the the Epstein blackmail is so obvious and clear, but I did not know prior to the files being released that Trump was himself personally implicated. I thought, because it seemed like they genuinely hated him that much, all the fake Russiagate, all those hoaxes, all the Nazi this, the unprecedented resistance that he had, that I thought that that meant he maybe was an outsider, whatever his many flaws. He wasn't a libertarian. He didn't have any principles. If he has any kind of intelligence, it's about being on TV and whatnot, but not about governance or policy or anything like that. That was always clear. But it did seem like he was an outsider. It did seem on balance. They were so vitriolically committed to stopping him that maybe that there was something legitimately real about him. Now, the one qualification would have been, well, they can't use the Epstein stuff because too many of the Democrats are themselves implicated. And so that's the one thing. It's like a murder-suicide for them to use. And I have to say, I think that's probably where we're at with that. With what's been released and the way that they've been acting, the best explanation is that Trump, like many others, is probably being blackmailed. I mean, if you want to be generous, you could say he's an easily manipulatable idiot who's jingoistic and likes the idea of being a war hero, and so he's doing all this horrible stuff, and it's totally inane. He's being obviously dog walked by Netanyahu. That's the charitable interpretation. The less charitable is that he raped a bunch of children and there's video of it and they're blackmailing him. I don't actually know which one's worse, but it seems like that's what's happening. But it seems, despite how much, I'm talking about Anna Kasparian, I got a letter from my grandma who's 105. My grandma is 105. She's almost 106. I've known her my whole life. I've never heard her talk about politics. And she was complaining about how unprecedentedly horrible this war is. Like, bro, her brother is buried in Normandy. Her younger brother. To see all these left-wing Democrats, you've got Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, now Alex Jones, on the same page as Anna Kasparian, Glenn Greenwald. It's astonishing. And if this keeps up, there is actually probably going to be some kind of pogrom in the United States at some point, which I don't want, by the way. But that's where it's going. And the way that the pro-Zionist media, the way that they talk, the way that they act, the way that they speak about and to us goy, is so infuriating that there is going to be a massive, massive backlash. And to be fair, a lot of it is justified at this point. It's just like when Israel is getting hit with missiles now, they, as a country, to the extent that we can be collectivists about it, they deserve it. They support it, and that's this kind of the Netanyahu is an odious figure in every sense, but it's not like, oh, Israel will be fine without him. Every one of his competitors is a war criminal. There are some realists who don't agree with some of the stuff that's happening, but not because they're necessarily nice. Ben-Gurion himself didn't think that they should take the West Bank because they would have to basically genocide the Palestinians there to keep the Jewish state. And I guess he had enough principle to not want to have to do that. He'd done enough already at that point. Maybe he just didn't want to do more. But this has changed so fast and so overwhelming. You have to give credit to Hamas, sad to say. They had help. They were getting $35 million a month given to them by Mossad. But October 7th really turned the tide. And like, I am sure, I mean, I can't believe the stuff I'm seeing on CNN even. I think CNN might be thinking we have to get as much out as we can before we get owned by Larry Ellison. But having reporters in the West Bank talking about settler violence and calling them illegal settlements, that wasn't even like they would never even refer to that. You had no idea. If you watched the news 10, 20, 30 years ago, you thought that the Palestinians like invaded Israel. And you never got, I mean, you could be an American and flattened into a pancake and they wouldn't talk about it. So, yeah. All right. Let me look at some of your comments, guys. How can I contact you like via email? If anyone wants to contact me, the best way to do it would either be on Reddit where I have the same name, or on Twitter where I also have the same name. By the way, I do have Twitter. I don't use it a ton, but I do actually tweet. So if anyone wants to find me there, that's you can. Yeah. So it's interesting that Trump in 2016, which by the way, Ivan and I did a video on Trump in 2016 before he got elected. Gosh, how much has changed in 10 years? He kind of acted like he was going to end the empire, didn't believe in it, and now I think it's happening, but I don't think it's 4D chess. I think that he was either blackmailed or just deluded into doing this. It does seem like he is very easy to manipulate through flattery, through threats, through his own deep insecurities that he's even admitted now recently. He said he likes to hang out with losers because it makes him feel better about himself, which why would you ever say that even if it was true? It does seem to me that he thought or was told, we know he was told by Israel, that this would be easy. That you do this decapitation strike and Iran will just give up. And here's a thing I was also thinking about. So I also just recently read a book on, it's called The Fall of Rome. It's about the decline of the Roman Empire. And it takes a very deterministic, there was a warm period, so the agriculture was good. It's not, I'm not saying this to denigrate it. I'm just kind of summarizing its gist, but also about the various plagues that had beset the Roman Empire. Really fascinating. But one of the things is, if you know anything about the history of Rome, is that by the late Republic they had conquered the entire Mediterranean. They had some famously major wars with Carthage, 3 of them. I guess the third one is more that they just annihilated Carthage. But the first 2 were like the first really big intercontinental wars. It wasn't a world war, but like big wars. By the start of the Common Era, they've taken over the entire Mediterranean, all the Greek states, Egypt, everything. And then they come up into conflict with a successor Persian kingdom. So the Persian Empire. I remember being confused by this as a kid because I had seen the 300 movie about Leonidas, the 300 Spartans, not the Zack Snyder, but the original from the 60s. And they talk about Persia. Persia is one of those countries that you always hear about. Russia, Persia, China. I remember looking on the globe and not being able to find it, and just I had to ask somebody, and like, oh, Persia is called Iran now. Persia it's not Arab. It's not filled with Arabs. They are Shiite Muslims. They're Aryans. They speak an Indo-European language. Right? There's been a coherent, unique civilization there since the Elamites, if not before. I guess the Elamites are probably not Indo-Europeans, but that's what's interesting. If you look at the early Persian kings, I think that the belief is that they must have married some Elamite princesses or whatever, but they would dress up in Elamite garb. So you have a situation where I have this Indo-European pastoralist, hunter-gatherer, marcher lord king, Cyrus the Great. Right. Interestingly, Cyrus is one of the few conquerors who is well regarded by the people he conquered. So famously he took over, he defeated the Babylonians and took over the Levant and the Middle East. And he's highly regarded in the Hebrew Bible, right? Like in the Jewish Bible, Cyrus is considered a great king. And he truly is one of the most, I mean, if you just list the most important monarchs ever, he has to be included very highly on that list. Now, Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, famously. But Alexander the Great is probably the greatest or the second greatest military conqueror in the history of the world. And his empire fell apart as soon as he died. But then the successor states that were set up by his generals, they retained their Hellenistic Greek elements, but then they also became kind of localized. So the Ptolemies ruled Egypt, but they also ended up becoming very Egyptian. And the Seleucids ended up ruling that part of his empire, but they became themselves very much more Asiatic, right? They famously had elephant armies and whatnot. But by the time the Romans show up, there's a new empire, the Parthian Empire. So it's this Persian Iranian, but now fused with like Greek literature and Greek learning, and the Romans and the Parthians fought for centuries, and they both took their licks. There were some famous battles where the Romans were defeated, but the Romans gave as good as they got plenty of times. And by the reign of, say, Trajan, you do have Romans actually getting all the way to the Persian Gulf, right? But they never conquered, never. The Roman Empire never conquered Persia. They won some big battles. They also lost some big battles. You get a successor state called the Sasanian Empire. Same thing. They fight the Byzantines for hundreds of years. Again, sometimes they lose, sometimes they win. There was a brief period where they did actually conquer a big part of the Levant, I think even parts of Egypt. And then the Arabs showed up. And when the Arabs conquered Iran, they did bring their religion, but then many cultural practices that existed in the Zoroastrian Iran actually transmuted to become Muslim. So there's things in the Quran, like the punishments for adultery and stuff, that modern Islam does not follow. They adopted the Zoroastrian Iranian position. So this is a case where, yes, the Arabs won, but that society was coherent enough and say persuasive enough, influential enough that it actually changed the whole, right? There's a famous quote from Horace that says the Romans conquered the Greeks and then were conquered by the Greeks. The Romans took over all the Hellenistic kingdoms, but then became enamored with the Greeks, and they were heavily just Grecified, Hellenized as a result. Something similar happened in Islam with Iran. The point I'm saying is that they're not just a bunch of dirty Arabs. That is a Indo-European unique civilization, and like the government that's there has. I'm not a fan. They have many problems. They have done many stupid, horrible things to their own people, and I'm not talking about this fake crocodile tears about protests, which we don't know. We have no idea how much of that was even genuine and how much the numbers are, because you can't believe anything that an Israeli talking head says. But the idea that we're just going to topple that, that we're going to invade a country 3 times the size of Afghanistan with 96 million people. They were never colonized by a European. They were never, partially occupied briefly for certain times, yeah. But that was never part of the British Empire or the Russian Empire or the French Empire. It was part of the Alexander the Great Empire. It was part of the Genghis Khan Empire which actually, we get our word Genghis Khan comes from Persian, a Persian dereliction of his name, Chingis. But there again, the Mongols who ruled Iran became Iranian, essentially. Right? They were assimilated and hybridized into whatever, just like what happened to the Greeks. The point is, it's got a staying power. It's got a unique civilization. It's a node of civilization that's independent, and it can go back as far as any others you want to talk about. Farther than most. I would say I was going to make a whole video about the mythology of the Jews. Um, if you want to look at, like, say, English, we could say, look, English is such a young, we don't have the earliest attested English is from whatever the ninth century or maybe the 8th century. The oldest work of literature is maybe Beowulf. It's like that's not that old. It's the sagas are older than that. Obviously, Latin and Greek is way older than that. But sometimes you'll hear Jews talk about, oh, we're this multi-thousand year. That's that. Yes, you can trace things that far back, but like a recognizable Judaism like we have today is not that old. I mean, Judaism today, rabbinical Judaism, is a post-Christian religion with a post-Christian history. Second Temple Judaism, people like to say it goes back to the Bronze Age. That's just not true. I'll do a video on it. Something, I have a book there. It's by a Jewish author at the University of Israel, Haifa or whatever, in Israel, saying Judaism as we know it does not predate the Hasmonean period, which is the period, 200, less than 200 years before the Common Era, the 100s BCE or BC. I don't want to sound like a Jew and say BCE. It hasn't been around that long. The Judaism before that was polytheistic, like blatantly polytheistic. But if they want to shoot their antiquity back because they do some math on the Bible and they say, oh, Moses this, Moses that, it's totally not true. Like archaeologically, we have a pretty good idea. I mean, Egypt has pretty good records of that whole period. But just imagine as like an English speaker, if I said, oh, actually, English is actually 5,000 years old. Like, how do you get that number? Well, we can reconstruct Proto-Indo-European, and like English definitely does come from Proto-Indo-European. And then we could start saying, oh, you can get Proto-Indo-European. Modern Hebrew, for instance, there is a real language, but they reconstructed a lot of it. And it would be like we could reconstruct Proto-Indo-European and be like, oh no, English isn't 1,000 years old; it's 5,000 years old because it goes back to that. And at that time scale, like Indo-Europeans, English and Iranians are the same. It's the Yamnaya, the Bell Beaker culture from Ukraine and southern Russia was probably where it started. And in that way, aren't we more kin with the Iranians? And that's the other crazy thing, this Judeo-Christian bullshit. Look at how Judaism views Jesus and how Islam views Jesus, and you tell me which one's closer to Christianity. Right. So obviously Muslims do not think Jesus is God, but they think he's this important prophet, that he's like a perfect human, and that a lot of them, I think, do believe that like he will bring about, like, I don't want to say the rapture, but the end of times, that he has still, his eschatology is still super important. They have an official toleration of Christians, of people of the book. I mean, most Muslims do. Now, the ones that our government subsidizes when they're subsidizing ISIS, they will chop Christians' heads off. But most Muslims haven't been like that historically. And then you look at how Jews view Jesus, and he's famously boiling in shit forever, and his mother was a whore, and he's a magician from Egypt, and curse his name and curse anyone who believes in him, and spit on Christians is like and then you have this gaslighting. I saw Shabbos Kestenbaum saying, oh, the Talmud doesn't, when the Talmud says Jesus is burning in shit, it means a different Jesus from Nazareth with a different mother named Mary. So all the stuff in the Talmud about Jesus is horrible and Jesus is in hell and Jesus is boiling in shit and Mary is a whore, that's not and he's from Nazareth, but that's a different Jesus. That's not the Jesus that Christians worship. That is a different Jesus. So honestly, I don't know why you hate us. Like the mendacity, there's going to be a backlash. All right, let me get to some of these comments. This is a little potpourri episode, guys. West Virginia and Virginia have some of the highest bituminous coal. So fun fact: the coal beds in Appalachia are about 12 feet thick, but there's coal beds in Wyoming that are 100 feet thick. So if you go on like Campbell County, Thunder River Basin, there is, and it's strip mineable. You don't do shaft mines there. It's also low sulfur, so it's called clean coal. Now, no coal is truly clean, but it's much cleaner, and it's just a kind of a pricing mechanism because there's more there than we could ever really use. And apparently, there's coal beds in Alaska that are 600 feet thick. Now, extraction from Alaska is expensive and difficult, but like it's definitely there if the price is right. Uh, um, I went too far back. Kanye is going to be president. They have financially blackmailed him most likely. There's tons of theories. There's theories that he converted to Judaism, that he's Chabad. He's a Chabad Lubavitch now. And there's some evidence to that. I mean, Jared Kushner is a Chabad Lubavitch. He married Trump's daughter very publicly and almost in a humiliating way. Mark Levin called him our first Jewish president. It would absolutely not surprise me either if, I mean, if you were a Jewish rabbi and you had the opportunity to make the president of the United States into a Jew, of course you would do that. They even if he if for some reason Donald Trump wasn't circumcised, they'd probably not circumcise him just to get him, just to say that they'd be able to do that and have that kind of power over him. Because even that would be blackmail. Because if it came out that he had converted, I mean, he was never really Christian, so like I don't know if he converted from Christianity, but yeah, there's a lot of theories that that happened, and that may be the case. You know, he is insecure. He's from New York. He loves rich people. He's craving of status. And so you have a bunch of super wealthy, super powerful Jews who are a clique, who are going to give you automatic validation if you join them, right? Who treat everyone who's not a Jew as shit, but then treat everyone who is a Jew as, you know, God's chosen better than everyone else. Why wouldn't you do that? And if they offer you any kind of like financial incentive or whatever, so much the sweeter. He was a New York Democrat, but by today's standards, that's like Pat Buchanan. Yeah. My grandma lists to 105, 105 insane. She'll be 106 this summer, and she's still doing good. She last just 2 weeks before her 105th birthday, she fell. She fell and she got hurt. She had to go to the hospital, and my parents called and they were like, "This is real serious. You know, this might be it." You know, and I'm like, "Oh, so what? Did she break anything?" Like, "Oh no." "Oh, is she?" I'm like, "No, she's fine." They and actually like 2 days later, the hospital kicked her out. But she did apparently. Her heart was a little irregular, so they gave her a pacemaker. And I looked it up. It is possible she's the oldest woman to ever get a pacemaker. The oldest confirmed I could find that was like really, really solid was 99. There is a case from India of 105, but it's disputed because the Indians lie about that kind of shit all the time. If that case isn't true, then she's the oldest woman to ever get a pacemaker, but she's fine now. Like, it's crazy. Still drives. She lives on her own. She doesn't live in a home. Reads, writes, the whole thing. I followed you on Reddit via the uncircumcised page. Wow. Well, I don't really post there any, so that's crazy. Are you a market anarchist? I am absolutely a market anarchist. You know, so the world has changed. I haven't changed as far as that goes. It is. It maybe it seems that way because it's like, well, am I going to make another video about why the road should be private? And probably not. But like, I still feel that way. I still think that way. I have nothing. You know, this culture war stuff is interesting, but how much does that affect what I think the tax policy should be or what the regulatory environment should be? And it doesn't really. I can't really see all the comments really well. Maybe if I do this. Oh, there we go. They were like getting cut off. The location where the Ukraine war is happening is exactly where the Khazar Empire was. Jews are discussed how after the bloodletting they are going to relocate there. I don't know. I think that is wrong. Factually, the Khazars I don't think were in Ukraine. I think they were more in the Caucasus, in the Kuban, maybe. The Khazar hypothesis, I get. So for those who don't know, there was a kingdom called the Kingdom of Khazar in the ninth and 10th centuries uh, in the kind of north of the Middle East, in the Pontic, in the Kuban, around the Caspian Sea, and we don't have a ton of history from this place. We have some, and famously, the king, the ruling elite, had a debate. They said we're going to pick one of the three monotheistic religions: Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, and they ended up picking Islam. I'm sorry, they ended up picking Judaism. And the ruling elite in that society converted to Judaism. And about 100 years later, that kingdom was conquered by a kingdom called the Khwarezm, which is a much larger state. And then that state was subsequently conquered by the Huns, by uh, the Mongols. I was going to say by Attila. That's not true. Not Attila. Wrong century, wrong place. And because this area is not too far from the Pale of Settlement, that the heart of Yiddish Jewish world, there are theories that that's where they come from. That that these Khazars were Jewish, and then which the leaders were. What we don't know is if they emigrated to the Pale of Settlement, and we don't know if many people many normal Khazarians converted to Judaism. I personally, there was a time when I thought that was really compelling. I actually think now we have really, really good attestations that the diaspora goes way back before the expulsion. In fact, the expulsion is a myth in the sense that in the revolt against the Romans did conquer Jerusalem. They slaughtered untold numbers, and then they said Jews can't live in Jerusalem. They did not say that they have to leave Palestina. And even before that had happened, there were large Jewish communities all over the Mediterranean basin. In fact, there's estimates that, at the start of the Common Era, the majority of Jews in the world did not live in Palestine. There were a huge number in Egypt, in Alexandria. There were a huge number in Rome. There were something like 40,000 Jews in just the city of Rome, but all over Anatolia, Cappadocia, in Spain, all over North Africa. So we know that those communities existed and continued to persist. And so, since we know that, I tend to think that they are from there. Either story kind of defeats the fake mythology of Zionism. Because if they're from Khazars, then they converted, in which case there's no blood connection, which they think is relevant, which it's not after this amount of time. But that's what they think. But it destroys that. The others, if they immigrated voluntarily for economic reasons, as they did, that doesn't give them the right to, if you move out of your house because you decide to move out, you don't get to bash in the door 2,000 years later and say, I get to take this place because the Romans kicked me out. It's totally asinine. The whole story, every part of it is asinine. The whole fake Zionist history of Israel is just, and in fact, that whole bookshelf is Israel/Jewish history. It's just totally. Maybe we'll do more videos on that. We'll do a reading list on that. But no, so I think it's not likely, not impossible, that Eastern European Jews have their origins in Khazar. I think they probably have their origin from Western Europe emigrating there. And, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Russian Empire had reasons to promote them, and so they did. Have you read Jason Reza Jorani's book Prometheus and Atlas? No, I have not. I'm not familiar with that book. according to Trashman's, nobody in the Levant was keeping kosher until the second. Let me grab this book. It's right here. Where is it? No. That's not it. There's so many. Treacherous Alliance, Culture of Critique, Israel and the Bomb. Oh, this is good. When Palestine Complete, The Empty Wagon. Oh, here it is. Sorry, it's much thinner than I thought. So I haven't read this yet, but I've seen interviews with the author. So this is Between Yahwehism and Judaism by Jonathan Adler. Right, so he's an American Jew, but working in Israel. He's an archaeologist. And you can find interviews with this guy online. So, super Jewish. And one of the things that they study is they have a record of correspondence from Egypt. So Egypt is great because it's arid and stuff gets preserved really well there. And there was a colony of Hebrews in Elephantine. Elephantine's on the Nile in southern Egypt. And at some point, one of the pharaohs had employed or forcibly migrated a bunch of Hebrews there. And then while they were there, they would write letters back to Jerusalem, to the temple, all kinds of normal correspondence. And one of the things that's crazy about the letters is like, they're clearly not monotheists. They worship other gods. They worship, I think not just El is probably like, I don't know, they worship a couple of them. And the priests are writing back and they're not saying, hey, hold up, we're monotheists. They're like, oh, no, that's how you do it. That's the right thing. So he's the guy who says, recognizable Judaism is from the Hasmonean period. So that's like after Alexander the Great. So that's a long time ago, but that is not the Bronze Age. That's not the early Iron Age. That's younger than Greek. That's younger than Rome. That's younger than Carthage. So it is a myth to talk about, going all the way back that far. Let's see. Oh, it's funny. I'm just seeing your comment now. Jonathan Adler, yeah. Yeah, so they weren't keeping kosher. They didn't believe in one God. They didn't do, they didn't have rabbis. They had the temple. Even in the history of like circumcision, they did not do circumcision the same way. The original type of circumcision was way more minor, where they basically didn't remove all the skin, but they would just almost do like a ceremonial pinprick kind of deal. And it was actually as a result of Greek persecution that they became more extreme about it. So like all that stuff is not as ancient, and rabbinical Judaism is even less ancient. So yeah, it's like cosplaying. It's like if I start speaking Proto-Indo-European and I could start saying, my culture is actually 5,000, 6,000 years old. That really strains credulity. You're kind of cosplaying at that point. It's kind of cool, but like it's not accurate. I think the Bible was actually originally written in Hebrew. So if you're talking about the Pentateuch, if you're talking about the Torah, the first 5 books, there were many, many, many authors, and I think that they think the Song of Deborah is the oldest part, but everything we have is from much, much later. And in fact, the earliest copies we have are actually, the Pentateuch are actually Greek translations. Like the earliest full copies of the first 5 books we have are in Greek. And I think that that's even before the Christian era, that one of the Ptolemies was into learning about everything. And so he had people compile complete lists. And so the earliest versions where we have the whole thing are actually in Greek. Now there are fragments that are older that are in Hebrew or Aramaic. I think in Hebrew, archaic Hebrew. But there's no vowels in ancient Hebrew, so like they had to make a lot of that up. I was seeing a video of a guy who's from Israel who was saying how he was born in Israel, but both his parents were from the U.S. And so he spoke English and Hebrew, but he said he much preferred English because it has like triple the vocabulary. And so there's just not as many words in Hebrew because I don't want to say it's a made up, but it's a largely reconstructed language. And it's just not as, in his opinion, not as, you don't have as a refinement in the things you can say because it's just so much more basic. But yeah, there's a ton of debate here about when things were first written. There's a lot of attestations to there's this tendency to want to say stuff is older than it was. And there's a lot of make believe too. So historically, like if we're talking about the historical kingdom of Israel and Judah, they were tiny. Like Israel didn't even include Jerusalem. Israel was the northern of the two kingdoms. It was probably the more important at a time. And that kingdom was destroyed and conquered by the Assyrians in like 729 BC, in the 700s. And it probably had been around since the 900s or 800s. And they don't have direct evidence of King Solomon or King David, but there are references to the house of David and the house of Solomon. So people think maybe there were, but it's only a later references. That kingdom was defeated and destroyed by the Assyrians. And then they think many of those people moved to Judah. And then in Judah, they wanted to make a common narrative that incorporated those people. And the way that they did that was to say that there had originally been one kingdom that had split. But archaeologically, there is no evidence that there was ever one kingdom that had split. It sounds like Judah and Israel were just totally separate kingdoms, that they were culturally and similar, but there were differences in the religion because there's different strands in the Bible that are in some cases mutually exclusive or different enough that scholars think these are totally different traditions that have been melded together. So it would almost be like if, I don't know, if a bunch of Chinese people moved to America and we had to get along. And so we made a story and we said, we're going to take the Journey into the West and Lord of the Rings, and we're going to make a common book between the two of them so we can all get along together. And that can be our shared history. And we'll pretend that in the way back that the United States and China had actually been one country. That wouldn't be true, but it would make sense why they would compose stories like that. But, even the largest extent of those two states, you're talking about like 1/5 the size of current Israel. So like Elat, the Negev, none of that would have been part of Israel. Gaza wouldn't have been part of Israel. Gaza was part of the Philistine Pentapolis. So like even people think that the name Palestine comes from the Philistines. The name Philistines probably comes from the Peliset. The Peliset are probably from Sardinia or Italy. They were one of the sea peoples that were in this migration at the end of the Bronze Age, and they probably sacked, the Mycenaean kingdom, the Hittite kingdom. They ended up failing to invade Egypt, and then they set up like a civilization in the Levant, in Gaza, and they had these 5 cities. That's why it's called a pentapolis, like Gad and I can't remember, Ashdod, maybe a few other ones. But that was not part of Israel either. Like that was a separate thing. They were in conflict with it. So there's a lot of myth making in the Bible, and then there's a lot of myth making about the Bible. It does not mean everything in it's fake, but we can attest a lot of it. A lot of it is a myth. Are you referring to Adler's Origin of Judaism? He mentions that the earliest archaeological evidence that we have of Judaism begins being widely practiced dates from the 3rd century BC. Yeah, he specifically says the Hasmonean period. And before that, it's kind of nonsensical to talk about Judaism. Uh, and so they don't like that because they want to pretend like it's the oldest thing in the whole world. Uh, but just think about that. The Hasmonean period, the Persian Empire is already gone by then, right? And the Persian Empire is a latecomer too. I mean, you compare it to Egypt, or you compare it to any of the Mesopotamian places, or even, Minoan Crete, Mycenaean Greece, Troy. All that stuff is older. Is older. I mean, the Iliad is definitely older than anything in the Bible for sure. Um, the Hebrew Bible borrowed from Plato. Oh, I'd never heard that before. But yeah, there's apparently the oldest full texts of the Pentateuch. It's called the Pentateuch. It's the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Now, I had thought that when the New Testament was written in Greek and a lot of Gentiles had become Christians, that they maybe retroactively, oh, let's go read the Old Testament now, and they had it. But it actually, apparently, that translation predates Christianity, and that one of the Ptolemaic kings or philosophers had just, and the Ptolemies were famous for having a huge library and trying to get every book. They were kind of infamous. They would write to other ruler, hey, let us borrow your books, and then they would just keep them. But that there was some scholarly effort to create a Greek translation of the Pentateuch at that time. Uh, got the right book, but not that. Yeah. I wonder how old Jewish circumcision actually is in light of that. Well, so in the Bible, there's textual evidence that circumcision began as child sacrifice, and this makes sense because the truth is that the Jews, Canaanites, whatever, that they're Canaanites, that they didn't come there from Egypt, they didn't come there from Iraq, from Ur, that those are myths, that they are local Canaanite people. And so Canaanite, there's this whole pantheon of deities who are now famously in the news now. I mean, we're seeing Baal, like effigies of Baal being burned. And that stuff is in the Bible. It's condemned in the Bible. The Romans talked about that because the Romans were the Romans, who is the biggest enemy of the Romans? It wasn't the Jews. It was the Carthaginians. They had these two life or death struggles. Actually, the first one wasn't really a life or death struggle, but the greatest enemy that Rome ever had is Hannibal Barca, right? But the Carthaginians, Carthage is in Tunisia, but it was founded by people from, I want to say, I don't want to get the wrong city. It was either Tyre or Byblos, but one of the Phoenician cities, right? And had their Phoenician deities. And so one of the things the Romans said about the Carthaginians is they did child sacrifice. And we know that some of the Canaanites would do child sacrifice. And there's a spot in the Bible in Genesis where Moses' wife has one of their children, and an angel appears and says, "Give me the child." And she doesn't want to give the child, so she's here. And she circumcises the boy and gives the foreskin instead. It says, "Here, take this instead." And apparently this is enough. And the angel goes, "Oh, yeah, that's good enough for me," and then leaves. And the implication is that male circumcision is a stand-in for male child sacrifice. That you did sacrifice, and then at some point they became more progressive and said, let's just cut off part of the penis. And so that became a kind of a substitute. And I think that that's probably right, because we know that the Canaanites were doing child sacrifice in some degree. From what we know, it wasn't like Aztecs where they're sacrificing people all the time, but more of in cases of great need, you would do a child sacrifice. And some people, there was actually hundreds of years where people thought the Romans maybe made that up to make the Carthaginians look bad. But I think now the consensus is that's actually true, that many Canaanites did that, including the Hebrews. This is what's also kind of sick about the whole thing. Amalek, all these other people that the Jews want to genocide, like they are culturally, linguistically, historically, I mean, to the extent that they are Levantine, which, look, let's face it, like Ashkenazi Jews, even Sephardi, they're Europeans. I mean, even if they're if you want to pretend that there's a drop of Levantine blood in them, which I am not convinced at all, but if that's true, then the other Arabs, Palestinians, they're their brethren. They're more closely related to them than Europeans are, according to their eschatology, which makes the whole thing even worse. Adler points out that Judah had a few pig bones, dated from the 3rd century, but Israel in the north had many of them. Yeah, so in my other reading, I mean, there's a... I haven't quite finished this one yet, but I'm almost there. Why the Bible began. And this kind of is a tracing of the scriptures and where they likely originated and the integration. So like the Northern Kingdom definitely is historical. We know it existed. The Assyrians talked about it. Boom. It's attested. We know it. Southern Kingdom also attacked by the Babylonians in the 6th century, the 500s. So we know that happened too. They probably were never united, and they probably were culturally had many similarities, but also different in some ways. And whenever this integration happened, they had to make sense of it. But then the story is not totally coherent. And there's differences like one of them seem to emphasize more the Moses story, and others more of the David Solomon story. So I can't remember which is which. It's fucking complicated. Yeah, the dietary laws weren't followed. And even close reading the Bible, it's clear it's not monotheistic. Early on, it's more of like a heliocentrism, where it's like there seems to be one God that's the chief God, but there's other gods. You know, he says, don't worship other gods except for me. That doesn't mean there aren't other gods. It's just I'm a jealous God, and I want you only to worship me. So it seems like they made their local deity the only deity. And people think that actually comes later. That's something that happens in the Babylonian exile, that when they're in exile in Babylon, then they start to talk about that. And then when they come back, which isn't until after the Persians, this is about the other irony. Who ends the Babylonian exile and lets the Jews go back home? The Persians. And again, that's probably also a myth, because there's no way the Babylonians forcibly emigrated everybody who lived in Judea. They probably took some of the elites and left everybody else. And it's just like there was probably no expulsion. That's not what the Romans did. They said you can't go into Jerusalem, and that was probably just salt in their face for rebelling against them. But you rebel against the Romans, they're going to do that. They didn't show any mercy to Ichabod the Iceni in Britain. Right? If you rebel, they're going to fucking mess you up. And they did. But they don't want to mess up the whole economy. So, yeah, there's no they never expelled them. They had spread. The Roman Empire was great for everyone to spread. I mean, the Jews were able to spread later. The Christians were able to spread. The Greeks were able to spread. You know, you have this integrated market system, this integrated political system, that all these cultures from the Eastern Mediterranean were able to spread more than they had before. Not to say that they hadn't done any spreading before, but more than they had before into the western part of the basin. I recently saw a historian who thinks the Pelisettes were refugees from Mycenae fleeing a regional drought. Yes, I've heard that too. I think though that they think the Sea Peoples came to Mycenae. But there's other things. I mean, that for archaeologically, that it looks like the pottery of the Philistines is similar to Mycenaean pottery. There's even some of the names of the Sea People. So you have the Shardana, the Shekelesh, and some people think that those might even be like the Shardana might be from Sardinia, like the Shekelesh might be from Sicily. The Weshesh. Some people think the Weshesh might be Troy. Walusha, so we call it Troy, but I guess in the Iliad it's called Wilios, and in Hittite it's called Walusha, and so some people think Walusha might be the Weshesh, but we don't know. if Shardana is Sardinia, does that mean they came from there or that they went there? And like, sadly, when Ramses III was making his great inscription in Luxor, he didn't like have anthropologists interview the sea people and tell us what part of the Mediterranean you're from, and we'll write it down. They didn't. They sadly did not do that, or wouldn't have known how. And even if they had, we wouldn't. I mean, they were not literate societies, so we wouldn't be able to like piece their names together. But the Peliset, I think there's more confidence, maybe not high confidence, but good confidence that they became Palestinian. They settled and became the Philistines of the Bible. And that's probably also where the word Palestinian comes from. And the other thing is that however many people left, Jews or Canaanites or whatever, most of the population would have stayed there, which meant they would have become Christian by the Byzantine era, and then mostly become Muslim after the Muslim conquests. And that the people who we call Palestinians today are probably the most likely modern descendants of whoever was there at that time. I think that's almost undeniable, which makes it even doubly tragic. But I could see them though saying, well, if that's true, but they converted away from Judaism, then they deserve to die even more. Even though we were talking about something that would have happened, at this point, 1400 years ago. Grimke's book that I was referring to is called Plato and the Creation of the Bible. I haven't read it yet, but it does have textual analysis. Oh, I'll definitely look it up. Plato. By the way, this war, I'm supposed to go to Germany next week, and I'm worried that like all the flights are going to get canceled. Let me look this book up. Who's this by? Grimke? Grimmick? There it is. Plato and the Creation of the Hebrew Bible. Nice. Take a look. Oh, so Genesis is like Timaeus? I mean, okay, so there is a flood in both, so that makes sense. That does track. So basically, you're saying that Genesis is a cosplay of Atlantis. Got it. Are you just making these names up? No, the Peliset, the Sardana, the Shekelesh, the Weshesh. Come on. You don't know the names of the sea people? Everyone should know the names of the sea people. Yeah, they're definitely... So, Trump's speech... Trump clearly thought that he could just assassinate all their leaders and show that he cannot be trusted, that he can't negotiate in good faith, and that he's just going to keep hitting them every couple months until he gets what he wants. And so they had every right and every reason to not stop, to keep going, and they will hurt the Gulf out. They will either destroy the Gulf states. I mean, those states are so vulnerable. They're going to collapse economically. Then they're going to collapse politically, because you have these kings, these Gulf kings, who are just the most ungodly wealthy for no reason. In some cases, most of their people are just ethically and religiously different. Even when they're not, there's such a difference in social class that they have to be worried about being overthrown at some point if this really continues, which it looks like it will. Or they will have to expel all the Americans, which looks like what they want to do now, which I'd be perfectly happy with. And the other thing is, Iran clearly knows, they've said so, that this is a war for Israel. And they're going to make Israel pay. And in another book I have laying back there, it's called Israel on the Brink by Ilya Pape. And his thesis and I haven't finished it, but I've gotten most of the way through. It's quite good. I was a little skeptical, but he says, look, um, there that you have Israel and then you have Judea and Sumeria, and Israel is the Ashkenazi Zionist, secular Zionist state of Israel, and it's the state of labor Zionism, of David Ben Gurion, of Moshe Dayan, of Golda Meir, of Levi Eshkol, and the last kind of, I mean, maybe Shimon Peres, Itzhak Rabin, right? And these guys, we don't want to do a good cop, bad cop, and be like, they're the good Zionists, and the other ones are the bad, and the Likud and the right wing people, they're the bad Zionists. All Zionists are bad. Okay, Zionism is a horrible ideology. It's a supremacist, racist, collectivistic, socialistic, communistic. It's the worst of everything, right? But the Ashkenazis were atheists. They were secular. Uh, they were realists to a point, and they're the ones who made the state the state. They're the ones who put together all the organization, the military, the technology, the governance structures, whatever it be, education, the waterworks, the agriculture, everything. And the religious element was a minority because a lot of religious Jews are anti-Zionist. A lot of religious Jews don't believe in Zionism. They think it's a heresy or whatever. But there are some, and at this founding of the state of Israel, they were a distinct minority, but they have a high birth rate. They are subsidized. They don't have to join the IDF. And they've grown and they've grown and they've grown. And what happened was, initially, the original Zionists, the founding, I mean, not Herzl, but the founders of the state of Israel, the Ben Gurions, they wanted, they're racist towards the Sephardic and the Mizrahi, the Arab and the Iberian Jews, and never mind the African Jews. I mean, there's Ethiopian Jews. They're the very bottom. The only way you can fall off the ladder, by the way, is if you convert to Christianity. You can become an atheist. That's not a problem. If you become a Christian, you are not a Jew anymore. You cannot. You have no right of return, like you're a traitor, you're a race traitor, whatever. But they wanted all the white Jews to move to Israel. And after World War II, a lot of them from Europe did. They didn't persuade that many Americans to move. And that's the problem, is like the number one country for Jews for 100 years has been the U.S. And even today, there's slightly more in Israel probably than the U.S., but it's like 7 million in Israel and like 6 million in the U.S. And the thing is, it's better for Jews in the U.S. They don't have to be in the IDF. They have lower taxes. They have more freedom. They're not going to get drafted. They're not going to get killed. Like, it's, the markets are better here. Like, there's more Jewish billionaires here than there are there. Jews have it better here than they have it in Israel. Just like everyone has it better here, pretty much, right? Swedish Americans have it better than Swedish people in Sweden. Not that many Americans moved. And you can see this all the time. Ben Shapiro, Alan Dershowitz, all these guys, these Israel First people, why don't they move? They could move. They'd be welcome. They never do, because they'd rather live here. And some of them, you might say, oh, they want to stay here so they can manipulate the politics. Even if they had no control over the politics, or they didn't want to manipulate the politics, they would still stay here. They don't want to live in Israel. If they did, they would. They like to fetishize Israel. They like to fantasize about Israel. They like to cosplay about Israel. But just like you or I would not want to go and live in a Yamnaya camp, they don't want to go live in Israel. They just want to fetishize it. Because that happened, though, that meant that Israel needed more Jews, and so they're going to have to settle for the dark ones, the Mizrahi and the Sephardi. And they opened up the gates for them. They also did a lot of false flag terrorism, like in the Lavon affair, where they would go to countries like Egypt or Iraq, and Mossad would do terrorism that would be blamed on the local Jews. And then in the backlash, those Jews would get chased out, and then they would come here. And then, 50 years later, Sam Harris will go, "So, oh, all the Jews had to leave the Arabs because the Arabs are so racist against Jews." Like, yeah, because the Mossad was doing terrorism to blame it on the local Jews so that they would get pushed out. But whatever. Um, but these Jews, less secular, more religious. And so now there's been this rise of these religious Zionists, but it's really fucked up. So, like on October 7th, when they have this existential event that was allowed to happen pretty clearly, I mean, they could talk about it in Israel, we'll talk about it here. And you have all the IDF soldiers who are the secular Ashkenazi Jews being like, you got to come back from the reserves, you got to go in the army, we're going to have to go and fight this war in Gaza, which they all support for the most part. Right? These Ashkenazi secular Jews are not humanitarians. They're Jewish supremacists. They they probably are deluded. I don't know. Some of them are deluded and think they're just doing what's best, and they've given the Arabs all the chances they could take, and it's the Arabs' fault for, you know, what was the saying? They never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. It's delusional because the deals they've offered the Arabs are patently absurd and would have to be rejected by anybody. Uh, some intellectually honest Israelis have even admitted as much. I think it was the foreign minister at Camp David said, I would have rejected the same offer, but okay. Uh, and when October 7th happened, all these Orthodox, all these secular Ashkenazi Jews are going in the military, getting called up, where the Haredi, the religious Jews, are exempt, and they're like having a festival dancing in circles. They don't do military service. They get subsidized, and now they're like 45% of the population. And then they go into the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and then they just do terrorism against Arabs, which the military abets and protects. I mean, famous just very recently. Again, this is crazy because CNN covered this. They go to a settlement. They find Palestinians being attacked by settlers. The military shows up to defend the settlers in their violence. And the CNN crew says, hey, this is an illegal settlement. And the soldier says, but it will be legal one day. I couldn't believe it was on CNN. CNN, of all places. They got to get that out before David Ellison takes it over. But, which might be exactly what they're doing. But, there's like several 100,000 Israelis have left. Like they just don't want to put up with this shit anymore. It doesn't. No, it's not because they had a religious awakening and think, oh, this was all really evil all along. What have we been doing? They just don't want to have to deal with it. They don't want to get hit by missiles all the time. They don't want to be drafted all the time. They don't want to be invading Lebanon every 10 fucking years. So his premise though is that the state is basically splitting, and that they're mutually exclusive and they can't possibly unite. I mean, you have like the religious ones look at the atheist ones like you're horrible, vile, you know, godless Jews. Now they still think of them as Jews, and you know the worst Jew is better than the best Gentile is in this eschatology, but that doesn't mean you get along necessarily. Uh, let's see how Iran will fight back. Find the book to prove your Dewey Decimal System is up to date. No, no such book. I just saw the movie on Golda, and I can't believe they fell for the trap and crossed the canal. And Golda Meir is like a Ukrainian, but she lived in Wisconsin for most of the time. And there's a conspiracy theory that her and Lyndon Johnson are like the same person because they look identical. Um, Judean Christian values, yeah, yeah. I think that modern rabbinical Judaism kind of seems like a backlash against Christianity, that it became anti-Christianity. And it kind of makes sense because you imagine, you know, the Torah is important to Jews, but then it also becomes very important to Christians. And like, I'm personally not super religious. I do feel I'm a bit of a, oh, who was it? Uh, is it Arian or was it Marionite? You know, there were early Christian theologians who looked at the Old Testament and said this is not the same God. This is like a totally different document than the New Testament, and decided that they were like maybe shouldn't be connected. But they didn't win out. That's a heresy, whatever. And um, but Christians put a lot of value on the Old Testament in general, with some exceptions. And if the Jews think that they're special because they have those texts, if the thing that the Jews think make them special is the Torah, but the Christians also have the Torah, and then you have a situation where the Christians are like by far the more numerous, which would have been the case at some point, probably definitely by the fourth century, maybe before, for sure by the fifth century. You have, well, what makes us different? What makes us distinct? You know, we're the Torah Jews. We're the ones who are really close to God, Yahweh. But the Christians say they are too. They worship one God. They just follow this, you know, Egyptian uh, magician Jesus fellow who's in hell right now. And so what do? You become the anti that. You define yourself as the anti Christianity, and you develop this whole rabbinical, and you have the oral Torah, which is the right. So what's the Talmud? Everyone's here. The Talmud. They basically come out and say, oh, actually, there was a whole other law that we never wrote down. And now that the Christians are running around with our book and learning from our book and venerating our book even more than we were, we're going to make a new book that they don't know about because they're not the priests. We are the priests, and we're the Pharisees, and we have the oral Torah that we kept secret, and there's no evidence of it. It was never written down. There's no sculpture. There's no reference to it. There's no reference to it in the Old Testament. We're just going to say that we have that, and then that becomes the Talmud. And then the Torah becomes almost like a vestigial part. And again, Judaism it's not a huge religion, but it's very diverse, and so it would be a mischaracterization to say they all view it that way, because I'm sure that's not true. But many of them do. And I do get the sense that in its emphasis and in its eschatology, that rabbinic Judaism became anti-Christianity. And it's just because the Christians took their book and made it their book. Sorry for the delay in getting to this point. There's one historian, Richard Mills, who disputes the claim that the Carthaginians sacrificed children. I think that was not just him. I think a lot of people disputed that. But we know, I can't believe I can't remember the name. It's Byblos or Tyre. The Carthaginians like self-identified as having originated from one of the Phoenician cities, and they're pretty sure that they did do child sacrifice in those places, and it's in the Bible. It's with Moloch. I'm gonna say, well, it's in the Bible is true, but I think that there's enough evidence. There's enough smoke that there's fire there, and it makes sense because they're sacrificing children on Epstein Island, and they have a giant ball statue there. So there you go, proof. The situations, yeah. So the problem with the Carthaginians is like they don't have any texts from them. We have all the stuff that the Romans wrote about them, and that's just not the best way. It's very similar with the Persians and the Greeks. The Persians were literate, but they didn't. If they wrote big literary texts, they didn't. I mean, there aren't many of them. There's inscriptions where we know that they had language, they could read and write, but we don't have any of their narratives. So so much of what we know of the Persians comes from the Greeks, just like so much we know about the Carthaginians come from the Romans. And it's such a weird lens. It'd be like learning about the Palestinians by reading what the Israelis say. I mean, what is that going to tell you? Carthaginian cities in Sardinia. Yeah, and so like after the First Punic War, the Carthaginians had to give Sardinia and Sicily to the Romans. Uh, Carthage, a Roman Holocaust. Carthage must be destroyed, which famously, what was the Roman center? Cato the Elder, every single day in the Roman Republic would say Carthage must be destroyed. Carthage was like their existential enemy, and to his credit, I mean, it's largely because of Hannibal had been so effective against them. Nobody had been so effective against the Romans. The Romans so routinely won battles that to be routinely defeated by somebody just traumatized them. But then people have to wonder, are they amping up the Carthaginians to explain their defeats? Are they being like, well, the reason we lost is because Hannibal is the greatest genius who ever lived? Or maybe they just had really bad Roman generals. We don't know. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. I don't know if he's thought of as Egyptian. Well, so in the story though, in the Bible, so it's hard with the synoptic gospels are not, as Bart Ehrman points out, the synoptic gospels are not identical. But in some of the stories, it starts with Herod's going to kill all the firstborn children, and so Mary and Joseph flee. Where do they flee? To Egypt, and then come back later. And so some people think that might be the source of that claim. And then the Talmudic claim is they're kind of admitting that he did magic, and so they're saying he's a magician. Which Christians would say, oh, it was miraculous. He was performing miracles. They would say he was doing like black magic. I got the same feeling from the Talmud. Yeah, I mean, they have all these prayers. You spit on a Christian, step on the goy, kill the goy. Goys who study the law should be put to death. That's another thing I saw. I mean, just this Gen Z, like 21-year-old, he goes, I'm going to do, it sounds like, what's so fascinating about this. Well, let me so he goes, the Holocaust is the worst thing that ever happened. To memorialize the Holocaust, I'm gonna go on a stair stepper, and I'm gonna take a step for every like, I don't think he said every person because there would have been 6 million steps, but for every 100 people killed in the Holocaust, I'm gonna take a step on a stair stepper. So I'm gonna take 60,000 steps, and which is like 15 Burj Khalifas on a stair stepper. So he starts doing it. He does it for like 20 minutes. And then he's like, okay, I can't go any further. I did my best. I'll have to keep doing this every day until I get to 6 million. But he goes, anyway, but now I want to end the day with my daily Talmud reading. And he spins a dial to pick a verse. And he goes, Sanhedrin 8:9. And he opens it up and it says, any goy who studies the law must be put to death. And then you realize the whole point of this skit is he's mocking the political correct veneration of the Holocaust, which is like the millennial way to look at Judaism. He accurately like depicts it and then subverts the expectation by quoting from the Talmud in a way that shows it as antagonistic to all non-Jews. And I feel like those views have become very, very widespread. And there's evidence. CPAC just happened, and a lot of people at CPAC were saying that's the vibe. It's Nick Fuentes, not Ben Shapiro. Which, if I have to pick, I mean, that's an easy choice. Boo, 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 boo. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. That's most likely true, though. He probably was a Palestinian Jew. What about the Frankists? That changed Judaism a lot. I don't know what the Frankists are, so I can't say. Do you have any opinions on the CIA Gateway Tapes program? I don't know. I don't know what those are. If you were a tour guide anywhere in the world, where would you be most knowledgeable? Well, to be a tour guide, you would have to personally have lived there and know it really well. And I don't know. I've never lived in any of these super interesting places, so I don't think I would be a good one. Herod killing of children caused Rome to ban them from execution, and that's why Pilate was required to condemn Jesus. Further point about the child sacrifice thing. There was a case of a Greek writing a dedication on a stela, one of the Tophets, since the Greeks didn't sacrifice children. Oh, well, but maybe they could have appropriated it. So it's also the case that the Greeks and the Phoenicians hated each other, and that they were always. I mean, in before the Punic Wars, there were like seven Carthaginian Greek wars in Syracuse in Sicily between like Syracuse, and there was a Greek general named Agathocles who invaded, almost conquered Carthage in the, I want to say like like the 270s or something. So the Greeks and the Phoenicians were both these maritime. They weren't like a political empire where every Phoenician speaker or every speaker was united politically, because that certainly wasn't the case. But these cultural enclaves, and the Phoenicians spread mostly in the Eastern Mediterranean, but also through Carthage into the Western Mediterranean. So Cadiz in Spain is a Carthaginian enclave, but the Greeks did the same thing. So like Marseille and Narbonne are Greek colonies. And the place where they competed the most was in Sicily, and they had all these wars over Sicily and whatnot. But they really didn't like each other. But they also they were maritime, they were ancient, they were sophisticated. Of course, in the long run, Western civilization is very much tied to Greece and not to the Phoenicians, but they were not religiously similar, but they were very similar culturally and like geographically. But I would not like even the name, like the name Phoenician is from Greek. They produced this purple dye from these snails, which was like the most expensive color, and I think the color is called like Phonica, and so they became the Phoenicians. Um, does the Talmud mention anything about Jews for Jesus? Yeah, that they should be killed. Uh, who was the guy doing the Talmud reading? I don't know who it was. Just some random person on X that I saw. Uh, Now, Shabbos Katzenbaum did the whole thing where he gaslit and said all the references to Jesus in the Talmud are a different Jesus from Nazareth with a different mother named Mary. They're not actually, they're not saying that they spit on and hate the founder of Christianity. They're talking about a totally different Jesus from Nazareth. So Judeo-Christian all the way. What the fuck? And then you read about how they love lying. It's okay to lie to goy. That goy are worse than they're just. It's just, what do you think Nick Fuentes, American First, gets wrong about their movement? Well, they're not libertarians. um, I don't. I don't claim to be an expert on Fuentes' thought, his political thought. Um, so he says that he used to be a libertarian, but whenever he talks, I never hear any kind of argument against the problems with statism, the problems with socialism, the problem with regulations or taxation, the knowledge problem, the coordination problem. Like those are just, I guess, taken for granted. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's an interesting figure. I mean, I would obviously favor him over. The thing that's I'm most suspicious about him is that how is he, if he's this guy who was canceled and debanked, which all happened, that apparently is true. He was on the no-fly list, and yet when he was at January 6th, and he's out there giving his speeches, he never got charged with anything, which does kind of sound very Fed. It does, like that's a stink that's hard to get off, and I can't prove it, and I don't know that it's true, but it does seem a little. Hey, why they went after nobodies? Why did they let him, not go to prison forever for insurrection? Uh, Nick Fuentes is a gay Mexican. He was at the Capitol video. Oh yeah, yep, yeah. That's what I just said. I had the same feeling. Ivan, you and I have very similar thoughts, I think. um, Jacob Frank was a Jewish Messiah that believed the sinning is how we get closer to God. Yeah, well, so like there's been a lot of messianic Jews, all kinds. There's Jews today who think that there's a Messiah alive today. You know, that it's their Rebbe this, that it's Schneerson, that it's whoever. So there, you could say that like it was only natural that a sect of Judaism would become messianic, but just none of them really picked up the way the Christians did. Uh, I want a new bookshelf update from you. Maybe we can do that. I focused so much on Imperial Rome and how the early Republic area during the Punic War was interesting stuff. Well, so like that's mid Republic. That's not early Republic. Um, yeah, there's it's people are really fascinated with Caesar and Anthony and Augustus and um, you know Cassius and Crassus, and you had the Spartacus, and you had all this stuff, and we have a lot of history about it. We've lost most of it. We have a lot, so it's this super compelling time. But if you think about it, most of Roman history wasn't a republic; it was an empire, and we kind of it's funny we gloss over all this other period when it was actually quite a robust. I mean, it's the most important state that ever existed. I don't think there's even a shred of doubt about that in the whole world. I mean, there's no Chinese dynasty. There's nothing that you can compare. Even the successor states that were much smaller and diminished, like the Byzantine Empire, and you could even argue the Ottoman Empire, even those would be major states in history. And yeah. Robert Barnes, the lawyer, says Nick is a Fed quite often. He mentions how he was on January 6th and didn't get held accountable for anything because he flipped and helped the feds. It's very possible. And I also wonder too. This stuff with Israel. It's so patently not in the interest of the United States that there have to be people that are not libertarians, but who are in the state, who are in the deep state, who have to not agree with what's going on with Israel. And so you think, what do they do? What's their mechanism? Do they promote Nick Fuentes? Do they promote Arabists? Like, what do they do? I can't imagine that they're all total Zionist, Shabbos goys. Maybe I'm wrong, but like, what translation of the Iliad or the Odyssey? Or which I don't know what's your question. Like, what about it? The age of the Antonines is my favorite area. Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius. So like the High Republic, the Golden Age, the era of the good emperors. You're not a Diocletian guy or a. I mean, look, I'll be honest too. I'm more drawn to the late Republic than the other era, but I think it's because there's so many titanic figures. How many people Trajan, I mean, he's not Trajan and Hadrian compared to Caesar and Pompey, they don't even compare in terms of like how famous they are. Well, I've only read one translation of the Iliad. I actually have it in Greek too. um Hexeth is firing generals who won't cooperate with land invasion of Iran. Two were fired today. You would think Hegseth is smart enough to know this will be a disaster. So I saw that. That's one of the reasons I saw that just before I started this stream. So the problem is that Trump wants everyone to be a lickspittle and a sycophant, and if you're not that, he gets rid of you. And if he's the source of your power is his proximity to Trump, then you have to do whatever he wants, and he has no loyalty. He will immediately get rid of you. So it will be his idea. He'll force you to do it. When it all blows up, he'll blame you, and then he'll get rid of you. He's done this so many times at this point that if you don't know he's going to do that to you also, you're a fucking idiot. So yes, it does seem like they're going to do a ground invasion, and he's hoping that it's going to go quick, and that's totally asinine. I don't know if he's deluded or if he's trapped. I don't know if he's been siloed in such a way that he thinks. I mean, he's like, "Oh, I'm so popular." I'm like, "How are you popular?" Everyone. I don't know how he could possibly believe that, but if he's delusional and that's what he's being fed, then I guess it's believable. It also could be he is getting blackmailed and he thinks that the Israelis are going to murder him if he doesn't do it. That's the other thing. Like he could actually be quaking in fear for his life. Based. There's a lot of that's what Charlie Kirk is all about. That's an impediment to the Iran war. B, a shot across the bow, and maybe that's the main reason, so that, hey, watch out, look what we can do. Maybe that's what Butler was about. We still never got any answers about what happened to Butler, and nobody who remembers what happened is satisfied with what we were told. Off topic, what's your question on weighted vests for exercise? For exercise, I don't think they're that good. If you're just going to wear one, though, to add weight when you're walking around, I think they're great. But what do I know about that? I don't need a weighted vest. I have plenty of weight without one. What are these crown things showing up on these comments, people? What do these mean? Top fans. What makes someone a top fan? I don't even know what that means. Shows that you're a top fan. Lots of top fans. I like Teleweave. Teleweave has appropriated the U.S. IT industry and has been invited to be the cyber protector of the critical infrastructure of the U.S. and the allies as a participant in the Pax Silica project. Oh, that's an interesting take. I know this thing where the ChatGPT forms a Star of David. You got the whole David Ellison connection. It's not the craziest idea. I think that the Israelis definitely have been pushing like a techno police state, Orwellian surveillance nightmare that they've been beta testing on Gaza and on the West Bank, and yeah, I could definitely see them doing that here too. It means they stalk your Reddit account. Oh, well, I'm screwed. All right, guys. Well, this has been fun. I should make more videos. Any last comments or words before I call it a night? Wait, so is Ali Alexander, he's like a pedophile, right? I don't know Fuentes. I don't have any inside baseball per se on Fuentes. I will say when he was going to Boston University, I was meeting a lot of guys at Boston University at the same time. I had like a slew of friends with benefits who were BU students at that time. But I don't remember. I've tried repeatedly to think, did I ever talk with or interact with Nick Fuentes on Grindr? And I cannot say that I did. Doesn't mean that I didn't. I could just maybe not remember. I don't think I'm his type anyway. So, but he does definitely set off the gaydar for sure. And it's interesting. Yeah. He does seem like he's probably gay. And at times, I mean, he met Glenn Greenwald at a gay bar. They both publicly acknowledged about it. And it was apparently not intentional. Like they just both happened to be there. Even more strange is the story that Jaden McNeil, a former association of his, told the New York Times. Was writing a story for McNeil. He mentioned wait, but so I don't understand. The New York Times was aware of the information but made no further comment. So what's the information? Yeah, and it's weird too because as hard as they went against Trump, and they really went against Trump, he still became president twice. So it's like, is this all just is this all just professional wrestling that they pretend, and that the people who are really, if there's people who are really a threat, they just don't even let them get in the door. So I think back to like Ron Paul, and it's like, oh no, there's no way that's happening, no way that's happening, and it just doesn't happen. They just, oh, all the primaries that he wins are canceled, he's ignored, and that's it. And all this vitriol against Trump was, I don't know, in some level performative, because I mean, we know the Epstein files are clearly redacted, but let's just assume that actually those redactions don't implicate him. But the fact that he's in there as much as he is, that would have been very, very useful to discredit him in 2015, in 2020. And the fact that they never chose to use that, even though like Biden definitely would have had that at his disposal, is very, even though Biden is apparently not in the Epstein files. He just diddles girls on his own and doesn't need to go there to do it, I guess. So that's interesting. So like I would have, if you had asked me before the Epstein files were released or before the intransigence of the current administration to release anything and to obfuscate and to even break the law, now that it exists, I would have thought, yeah, he's probably innocent of that. And now it seems like that's probably not true. He probably, you know, isn't. There's other explanations for him acting the way that he is, but that's the most likely to me. But it could be other things. It could be, oh, he worked for the CIA. We can't expose that. Whatever. It's extremely suspicious. Yeah, it's extremely suspicious that that happens, and then he has a rise. It's sad that we've gotten to the point that anybody who kind of rises in prominence, you have to suspect that, like, are they a plant? Are they an asset? Are they compromise? Are they? And it's like, is there anyone who's genuine? Is there anyone that we can say with any confidence? And it's just, it's very hard. It's very, very hard. I think that there's, it's clear that enough people can get on here and can make content. I don't just mean about YouTube, but just in general on social media. There's a low enough barrier to entry that there's a lot of genuine people who are contributing and who are involved, but then there's definitely networks of association and of access, and with the, you know, with the right assistance, nobodies can become somebodies and somebodies can be nobodies. Uh, we're talking about the Iliad. I've got. Let's see which one. I've got these guys. This is Homer and Herodotus, but this is in Greek. So it's both. But Homeric Greek is supposedly much more difficult than like Koine Greek or Classical Greek. I haven't read. I bought a copy of the Iliad from a gun show, and I read it on an oil rig in Utah in like 2012. Yeah. So now, do we think the Iliad uh, is based on a real war, like the actual violence in Troy? Or do we think that it's a story written in the 800s, or is the story written in the 600s about something that happened in the 800s? But again, it's like, imagine taking the Iliad though as a myth and then saying that gives us the right as Americans speaking English but who venerate the text as a piece of classic literature, the right to annex Anatolia. You know, and yet that's the level that we're at with Zionism. It's just disgusting. All right, guys, anything else? Thank you all for watching. Thank you for that book recommendation too, Ivan, the Plato. I'll definitely check that out. It's just been crazy. It's just crazy how much has been changing, how much has been going on, how fast. All the stuff with AI, all the stuff China with the Ukraine war, with Venezuela, with all these elections. On top of everything else, it seems like Trump is almost certainly gifted the Democrats the House and the Senate, and maybe even the presidency. Yeah, I've learned a little bit of Greek, but a long way to go. All right. 2 hours, 6 minutes. Keep getting distracted. Thoughts on Eric Clapper's Equal Protection Clause lawsuit against FGM? You mean against MGM? Um, so I've met Clapper before. It's interesting, Shabbos Ketzenbaum says that he's famous for suing Harvard for being anti-Semitic. What absolute bullshit that is. Eric Clapper is an intactivist, an anti-circumcision activist. He's a lawyer now, but before he was a lawyer, he worked at Harvard in some position. He wasn't a professor. He had some kind of job there. And he produced a play called Sex and Circumcision. And it's a one-man play. It's just him. And it's basically a monologue, a creative monologue with slides or whatever. And it was performed at Harvard in 2017. And you can watch it online. There's videos of it on YouTube, I think. And it's just a standard intactivist critique of circumcision. And of course, in the context of that, he criticizes religious Jewish circumcision. And it specifies the Brit Milah, the Metzitzah B'Peh. And when he did that, staff from the Harvard paper watched, and then within the next week came out with an article saying it was anti-Semitic that he had produced this play that criticized circumcision, and he lost his job at Harvard as a result. So they are definitely not anti-Semitic. They will get rid of people who they deem anti-Semitic for questioning circumcision. In terms of the lawsuits, I don't know that they've ever won a lawsuit on that long. I've been to, they tried to ban circumcision as a Medicaid qualifying surgery in New Hampshire last fall. I actually went to those hearings. They've successfully done that in a lot of states. I think maybe 15 at this point. But alas, it was not passed in New Hampshire because a Jewish person in the Senate, a Jewish woman, said that it was anti-Semitic. Because obviously, if the state doesn't subsidize the circumcision, then that's anti-Semitic. Of course, they don't subsidize bar mitzvahs, but whatever. It wouldn't be me if it wasn't. They're always good book recommendations, so thank you. The equal protection is very true because it's illegal to do to girls. The problem is that most of the judges are either Jewish or Gentiles who are circumcised. the experts they're going to talk to are going to be doctors who are Jewish or Gentiles who are circumcised, who have a vested interest legally and financially in maintaining that circumcision is justified, right? That it's not criminal at all. And so the expert testimony is always that it can't be considered an abuse, even though that same testimony would absolutely condemn female circumcision. So I applaud them trying, and I hope that it works, but it's a steep hill to climb. It's a very steep hill to climb. And indeed, in New Hampshire. So New Hampshire is like the whitest state. There's very few Jews here. I was trying to think if I had ever met a Jewish person since I've lived here. I've lived here for 12 years. And I've met Jewish people at PorcFest, and there's libertarians who are Jewish. But like, I'm talking in my normal day, going to the store, going to the gym, working, like, I don't know that I ever have. And when they do, and it's also a wealthy state, so you don't have a ton of people on Medicaid who are having kids. And so Medicaid covers circumcision. And the problem is Medicaid is not supposed to be used for, it's supposed to be used only for medically necessary, like life-saving stuff. You can't get a boob job. You can't get, cosmetic things with Medicaid. And it's billed, like when you bill it to an insurance company, it's billed as cosmetic. It's not medically necessary in almost all cases. And so it's illegal. It's just blatantly illegal as far as that's concerned. It's against the spirit and the letter of the law. But if people have to pay for them themselves, they're less likely to get them. And that's a problem, because if a majority of the boys being born are not circumcised at birth and they grow up to be adults, when they're adults, not only will they not circumcise their own sons, they will be receptive to the idea of banning circumcision. And so for those who are in favor of circumcision, it is very, very important that neonates be circumcised, as many as possible. And so they will fight. I mean, they will die on this hill to keep it subsidized. And so in New Hampshire, I went to the hearings in the State House. They could not verify how often it was done every year, but they were estimating about 100 times a year. And the number of those 100 boys a year being circumcised with Medicaid that would be Jewish would be probably zero. Like the statistical number is probably between 0 and 1. It passed the House, but in committee in the Senate, a female senator who was not on the committee, but she testified, said that this is anti-Semitic, which is, medical circumcision is not religious Jewish circumcision. Medicaid doesn't pay for a mohel or a rabbi. It doesn't pay for the ceremony, so it's not religious circumcision. It's like giving somebody a saltine and saying, "Oh, it's communion." That's not how it works. But some of the other senators said, "Oh, because of all the anti-Semitism, and this was post October 7th, we don't want to." So one of the casualties of the war in Gaza has been the banning of Medicaid subsidized circumcision in at least New Hampshire and probably other states. 2018, the federal anti-FGM law was struck down. The judge said that it was and the judge was Jewish. I remember this. I made a video about it at the time. And it was brought by the suit was brought by these. They were smart. They were these. I forget what it was. It was an ethnic group from Pakistan, and they did the least invasive form of female circumcision, where I think they referred to it as khatna, and they would do a ceremonial pinprick. So essentially, they would remove no tissue. They would do a pinprick, draw one drop of blood. So this is such an uninvasive procedure that a week later a surgeon would not be able to tell if it had been done. Right? So this is to even call that circumcision is kind of debatable, but it was performed on, I think, on the I don't know if it was the clitoral hood or the clitoris, but the federal law said you can't even touch a knife. Like, you cannot touch a knife to female genitals. You can do whatever you want to male genitals, and in the case of trans people, you can do whatever you want with that, but you cannot do female circumcision. And so the law was overturned. But a lot of people think the reason it was overturned is fear that it would lead to the logical conclusion that male circumcision should also be banned. And a federal judge named Goldstein is not going to do that. In addition, if you've had trouble with your foreskin in America, you need to see an Indian doctor who generally aren't. Otherwise, your physician is just going to tell you to cut it off. Interestingly, my long time roommates, I still live here, but I've lived with him for years and years. He's married. He's got 3 sons. They're all uncircumcised. And their doctors were from India, but they asked for it. At the hearings at the State House in New Hampshire, they had a doctor come down from Vermont, and he testified in favor of ending the subsidy. And he did say that there is like many doctors who have formed pacts with themselves that they won't do them anymore. And so there's actually quite a few doctors who won't do them. The problem is you don't need many doctors to do them, right? Even if 85% of the doctors say we refuse to do them, the 15% who are willing to do them, they can handle the load. So there's definitely a shift there in the medical industry, but it needs to be much more of a shift to get to the point where like it actually makes a dent. Is it reasonable to resent your parents for circumcising you? I would say that it is reasonable, but it's also debatable. It also depends. Like, did they have a choice? Like, was it just done without them even asking? That does happen. Like, there are cases of parents saying not to do it and they do it anyway. And in which case, how much do you blame your parents then? How much do you blame them if they have no idea? How much do you blame them if they didn't even think? I mean, it was actually a Jewish baby that was circumcised that led to a tightening of the regulations, because there was an Orthodox Jewish family who wanted to have a religious circumcision, which means not at the hospital and not with the doctor, but with a moil and with fucking teeth and with a high risk of getting herpes, but whatever, that's what they wanted. It was done at the hospital. And so they were unable to do the religious circumcision, which means they couldn't do the religious rite. And they got really mad. They sued the hospital. And so since then, apparently hospitals have become more, they need to get your positive consent, but apparently they've done studies where expectant mothers were asked like 17 times, do you want your son circumcised? That's like how many times you have to say no before they're like, okay, we get it. And that also that it will be locked in a bunch of paperwork where you're like, whatever, do you want us to render aid? Do you want us to do this? Do you want us to feed you? Do you want us to change your bedding? Do you want your son circumcised? And it's like, oh, you didn't even notice that you checked that, and boom. So, yeah. There's lots of things, too. You'll even see, I got an ad. I was getting ads on Facebook, and it was the 10 reasons circumcision's great. And then you like follow the links, and it's from some hospital. It's like the Greenwood Hospital of New York. I'm like, oh, what's this? And then you look up to it, and I'm like, well, formerly the Beth Israel Hospital. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Got it. Jeez. Traditional Jewish circumcisions take off a lot less than medical circumcisions. Old school traditional ones, absolutely. I don't know. The more modern ones, I think, are still pretty. When I've read about it, it sounds like when they established medical circumcisions in the United States, they used as their model what the Jews were doing at the time. The lack of data available on circumcision, despite government reporting requirements on medical data, is insane. They stopped doing it in the Bush administration. they've never kept really good records. Really, the only way to do it would be to survey like age cohorts, like get a bunch of 25-year-olds, get a bunch of 30-year-olds, and just check. That would be like the only way to like really do it. Uh, there's a widespread belief anecdotally that it's become a lot less common, and I would say I agree with that. I see a lot more of it in people who are younger than, but it's also a regional thing and whatever. Uh, bu- 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 bu. Parents are supposed to sign a waiver. They used to not even have to do that though. I resent the person who actually mutilated it, and that's where I think like tort law would be: you sue your doctor and be like, "You didn't have my consent. This wasn't medically justified or indicated." Yeah, I did see a study done in Italy showed they have the titles are kind of misleading, but they said, "Oh, the male G spot," which the technical term is the frenular delta, which if you know, you know, like absolutely. Um, you can generate an orgasm just by touching the frenular delta. Like you can just lightly touch the frenular delta, and you can make a guy orgasm. And I mean, if you just touch it once, no, but if you like stimulate it correctly, you can do that without touching anything else. But it's also interesting. All these other sensitivity studies that people do or have done are so laughably designed to not condemn circumcision because they'll say, we tested 15 men and 8 of them were circumcised and 7 of them weren't, and we would touch them at the midpoint of the shaft and report, can you feel this on a scale of 1 to 5? And it was like, testing the midpoint of the shaft, or the base of the shaft or the scrotum, that's not going to tell you. And then they would even say, like, we weren't able to test the tissues that were missing. Well, yeah, 100% of the feeling from the tissue that's missing is gone. I mean, studies like that are so, I mean, they're so obviously biased that it just makes you have to assume that the people making them are trying to rationalize the practice. What are your thoughts on the prevalence of autism in today's internet society? There's some agenda to make people either autistic or believe they are. I don't know. I don't know if it's more common or if the reporting is just more common. I don't know if it's intentional. It's very possible that it's not intentional. I have no idea. Is it vaccines? Is it plastics in the food? Is it power lines? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it it could be anything. Who knows? I don't know. I think autism and circumcision are interrelated. I don't know about that. I think there is pretty good. I think that there's strong evidence that circumcision is related to SIDS. I think that I think it does relate to things like erectile dysfunction. I think it relates to things like aggression. I think it relates I think there's a lot that you can pin on circumcision. I don't know that autism is one of those things, but I think there have been some recent studies to show that it correlates with SIDS pretty well. Um, so there's that. So that's not good. Um, it's also it's tricky because so much of the medical research in the world happens in the United States, and in the period when the United States has been a pioneer in medical research is the period when almost all the guys in the United States were circumcised, and the foreskin was like the most understudied or basically not studied part of the body, and the only thing that was ever talked about it was how to remove it and why you should remove it, and the 10 reasons why you need to get it removed. And so they didn't know that the frenular delta was so sensitive. Didn't one of the doctors on the AIDS studies hold a patent on one of the circumcision devices that were later used in the whole AIDS? I don't know if that's true. Those HIV, I've wanted to do videos on those HIV circumcision studies for a long time, but I don't know what you're referencing. I've never heard that before. Very possible. They definitely put their thumb on the scale though, because the cohorts of the people, they didn't track how they got HIV. So like if you were uncircumcised but you are also bottoming and you get HIV because you bottomed, the fact that you were uncircumcised doesn't mean anything. Or because you used drugs and you shared a needle. They would never investigate that. And so they couldn't tell how they were actually catching it. The other thing is the guys who were circumcised, A, could not have sex for 6 weeks out of the period, which is a substantial part of the study. And B, they would have to come back to the clinic over and over and over again for checkups, but then they would also be given condoms, told to use the condoms. And it's like, okay, so group A and group B, you keep giving them condoms and telling them they have to use them, and the other group you don't. And then you have a slightly higher increase, and the other thing that they discovered is even though they said that there was this reduction in the transmission female to male if you had been circumcised, they also found that there was an offsetting and even greater increase in transmission from male to female, aka the circumcised men were more likely to give HIV to the women than uncircumcised men. And if that, it was not just equal, it was greater. So there would be more net HIV. And what they did is they just canceled that part of the study and they said, oh, this is unethical because it's spreading HIV. So they stopped the study. But the other type of the study was also spreading HIV. But that was okay because they could then say that circumcision was reducing HIV transmission. So if the study looks like it's going to show HIV transmission goes up, you have to cancel the study. But if it looks like it's going to make it go down, then you can keep the study. Literally every video is great. So is that kind of like the chaos theory stuff with Charles Manson and Psych History Show? Look. Look at the thing that pops up on my YouTube. The Zionist Jew who is too Arab for Zionism. Okay. I've thought about Psych History Show decoding Charles Manson. Oh, that'll be interesting. So Chaos Theory, I don't think I did a video on that. That was a really good book. And I would say my own personal experience with hypnosis, I was like, this is really interesting. So like, yeah, there's a whole, I don't know. That's something I've talked about some, and I sometimes don't want to talk about. I get mixed feelings about it, but like, there definitely is. Like so the MK Ultra, the stuff that was declassified, they destroyed most of it, but they yeah. So I read Chaos by O'Neill, so I'll check that out. He MK Ultra says that they were going to test to see if they could give somebody false memories or remove memories through hypnosis. And at the end, they said, no, we couldn't do it. So this is a nothing. And I thought that's totally stupid because I can do that. I've given people false memories. I've taken people's memories. Like, it's actually not that hard. And I didn't use any drugs. I didn't use any esoteric techniques. I did read one or two books on hypnosis, and then I just practiced a lot. And like, I'm a pretty good hypnotist. I'd say I have a natural ability with it, and I did practice quite a bit when I got started. But like, I'm not a master. I'm not like the best you could ever be. There's a whole areas of it that I've never even touched, and yet taking away someone's memory, giving them new memories, giving them a new personality, that's like, I don't want to say that's basic, but that is not difficult. And for them to say they were never able to do it just strikes me as totally implausible. And with all the money they had and all the research, that would have been baseline easy. So I just think that's not true. That they have that ability, and that's again, if they had more research and more money, it'd be even more. And I do think, um, so that'll be interesting. I would like to see what he got wrong. Um, the stuff about do they confirm or deny that Charles Manson was on probation, getting caught for felonies, and then being released? Because that was, I thought, the most interesting part. Because if you if you're on probation and you get caught doing Grand Theft Auto, you don't just get probation. You don't just get released again, unless you know somebody who knows somebody. But like, yeah, hypnosis is like, it could be like the perfect crime because you can make them forget, you can make them see it a different way, and also its legal status is kind of ambiguous and its social status is kind of ambiguous, where a lot of people um just don't believe in it, so like they just don't take it as credible. So if you come and say, hey, I got hypnotized to do this thing, most people are going to be like, that's just totally fantastically absurd, and dismiss it. And then true, many people who say that might be crazy or might be making it up, but like it is very, very possible. You can apparently erase someone's sense of self in just 48 to 72 hours. It's temporary deprivation. You can give someone amnesia, like you can just using text. All right, just text, no voice, no spirals, no sounds. You can you can give someone amnesia. You can make someone forget their own name. You can like give them a new kink, a new like, yeah. And there's definitely networks. There's definitely networks around DC. And like, I mean, my personal experiences were very intense and extremely scary. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but like a couple years after what happened with me, I found, I don't know how to say this, that, that there was more going on. Like, I don't know, there's a network, there's an association, there's a lot that goes on. And it's like, there's also an interesting thing where like the hypno is very, very um prevalent in media, not just social media, in media, in movies and television. And some of it is like, this is tropey and whatever, but other parts of it, you're like, whoever made this has personal firsthand experience, because it's too accurate. Like, uh there's documents that are found after chaos. Oh, I'll definitely give it a watch. That's super interesting. Yeah, I think I remember reading one where they said when MK Ultra was first researching it, they interviewed like stage hypnotists, guys who had acts where they would hypnotize people, and those stage hypnotists would just casually brag about having sex with women, hypnotizing women to have sex with them, to rob them. And they were like, oh, I wonder if that's possible. And at the end they're like, oh no, that's not possible. I'm like, that totally is possible. Like, are you referring to something like Alice in Wonderland? I haven't seen Alice in Wonderland in forever, so no. I'm thinking about uh, the Jungle Book. So if you watch the Jungle Book, um, the stuff with Kaa and Mowgli, The guy who wrote that movie made other cartoons even 20 and 30 years before that about hypnosis for Disney. Like Donald, he made a cartoon like Donald Duck's Hypno Glasses. But in Jungle Book, Kaa is a snake. Kaa is voiced by a 60-year-old man at the time. Now I'm not saying the voice actor was in on it or whatever, but like it's an old man, it's a boy, and the way that Mowgli looks, it's not his eye. His eyes like doing the spirals is not correct. You don't get spirals, but the way his facial muscles relax and his jaw goes slack, and that looks very, very real. And I think that whoever wrote that had hypnotized boys a lot. How, I don't know what else to like. This was so long ago. I don't personally know that person, but like, yeah, I and they had clearly demonstrated it because the writer had written about it in other cartoons 20 years before that. So like he clearly was interested in it and had interested enough that it was showing up in his media. And I even know personally for me, like I remember watching cartoons, especially Disney cartoons, but not exclusively, that featured that a lot. So there's definitely a subculture there that is, like, it's one of those weird things where it's super public because it's a movie that everyone sees, but the meaning is hidden. Like it's dressed up as fantasy or whatever, and it has fanciful elements, but also has like true elements, and yeah, it's one of those things you notice, and then you're like, there's definitely something there, but yeah, there's definitely coordinated groups of hypnotists. There's targeting that goes on. There's people who put themselves in the right position, and it's like a perfect crime. What's a good premiere on hypnosis so I can spot the usages in media, like the best bang for your buck into powerful hypnosis? You mean, uh, the best primer? So I'd say the best book on how to do it is called Reality is Plastic by Anthony Jacquin. And I trust him a lot more than the other authors because he does acknowledge the potential for abuse, which a lot of hypnotists will flatly and vociferously deny, which is your number one clue that they shouldn't be trusted. Because there's this game they play where they say you can't make people do stuff against their will. Everything people do when they're hypnotized is voluntary. And so there go, if anything happens, it's voluntary. Right? If I get caught having sex with someone in one of my stage shows, I didn't force them to do anything because you can't make people do stuff against their will, right? So they're kind of giving themselves a get out of jail free card. So if you have someone who will acknowledge what is possible, then I think they're more trustworthy. And Jacquin does do that. Now I don't know him personally, so I don't know that he's truly that way, but that was my read on it. But even him, you kind of have to see it to know it. Like if you've hypnotized a lot of people, you see how they react, you see how they talk, how they move, what their eyes do, what their breathing does, what their pulse does. You get a really good sense of that, and I don't know that you can really gauge that super well without having done it. The other thing you could maybe do is watch a lot of stage shows. So stage hypnotists will often upload their stuff to market their brand or whatever, and a lot of times they edit them so you can't see everything, but there's plenty out there that you can watch and learn a lot. And so one that I found a lot from was say Zach Pinceps, who uploaded many videos of him hypnotizing people, actually in New Hampshire. And if you watch enough of those, you can kind of start to see like what it's like. The murders were made to resemble murders committed by Bobby. I don't know who that is. Okay. So it was like Minority Report, where he's trying to make it look like somebody else. All right, guys, it's getting very late. It's almost 1 o'clock. I think I need to go to bed. I still have to work in the morning. God damn it. But if you're watching this after the stream and you liked it, let me say hi. And if there's other stuff you'd like me to talk about, put it in the comments. The one time I was hypnotized on stage show, I remember it was very relaxing, even though I was in front of a huge crowd. Yeah. People react to it differently, but the number one, if I had to say there's the one thing that most people feel, it's relaxation. That's not always the case, but it's the number one most common. And yeah, you can be on stage in the lights, and you can be so focused on the hypnotist that you don't even notice all that other stuff. So, all right, great seeing all you guys. Ivan, Cinefan, everybody. Crazy times. Crazy times. I felt like I had to say something, so here it is. More later, hopefully.